To introduce someone that most of you probably know in some way, but you might not. I don't know if you've ever preached. Have you ever preached, Mark,
Yeah,
from the pulpit? Yeah, a long time ago. So I will tell you a little story. I had mentioned this 30 years ago this month. Lori and I moved to Sacramento, and it was probably right on top of 30 years ago this week, we were coming to, quote, check out this church for the very first time. We lived in Citrus Heights. And we're driving down here, and before they made the new little cutoff off of 80 right there by Auburn getting on to Watt, Lori and I were driving to church, and there was a guy walking with a gas can, and his vehicle was out, and Lori goes, that guy, it's 1,000 degrees out, he needs gas. And I said, I told Mom, I said, Lori, we are not going to be late our first Sunday to church, so no way. So we got here, and our Sunday school teacher was late that Sunday. Nobody knew where he was at. It was late. And it was my very good brother and friend, Mark, who was walking with the gas can, who was teaching that week because Pastor Phil was out of town, and you were preaching that week. So that was my first experience. I want to apologize publicly. Sorry.
Hey.
Jesus was working in my wife's life. I'll be not mine. Yeah. So anyways, but Mark teaches our Wednesday men's Bible study, teaches Sunday. He is an integral part of this church. I love you, brother. I'm excited to hear what God has for you on your heart today. I want to pray for you and cut you loose. Lord, I pray over Mark right now as he brings the word of God to us, and I pray over him that I know he walks with you, his heart's with you, his mind's with you. Now may you speak through him to us, and may our hearts and our minds be transformed and changed as you've been working through him and the scriptures. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, well, good morning. Good morning. It was 15 years ago that I got an idea for a sermon. And I realized that a lot of time has passed and my memory is starting to fade, so I figured that it was time to get that sermon down on paper. And so I asked Jeff and Lori for a time slot. I figured it could be a couple months out. They said 4 weeks, you got 4 weeks. So it forced me to kind of get this thing down. And I know it was 15 years ago because it was about that time my kids were in high school. My kids are both now out of college. One of them's in graduate school. But 15 years ago today, or not today, 15 years ago, about that time, my son Dan came home with a book. And the book he came home with is this one right here. Many of you have seen it before. I'm sure you've seen it. And I had seen it before. It was interesting. I picked up the book and I said, wow, I've seen this book before. And then I'll just kind of speed up. A couple years later, he came home with this other book, The Catcher in the Rye. The first one was called, for those of you who couldn't see it, it's Of Mice and Men. It's by John Steinbeck. The second book that he came home with was Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And again, I recognized both the books because I realized I had been taught these books in my high school, which by the way is 40 years ago. I'm going back to my high school reunion here in a couple months, and that's part of the reason too that I'm thinking about these things. And again, he came home with these books, and I realized as I picked up the books that maybe I had never really read those books. Now, I don't know about you. When I was in school, there were other things on my mind other than academics, and so and I didn't necessarily want my kids to do the same thing I did, which was, remember the notes, those books you could get, the Cliff Notes? I think that's what I did. So I didn't want my kids to do that, so I decided I was going to kind of trick them into reading it and read it myself. So I actually read the book right that time. If you look at the book, it's about this. How fast could you read that? I found out I could have read it in a day if I wanted to as a kid. So I did read it in a day. And I didn't have to do that with Dan. Dan reads. But I read it, and then I did the same thing with Catcher in the Rye. When that book showed up, I read it too. And it was kind of interesting because as I read it, that's when this sermon title came to my mind. I'll just show you the sermon title right here. The Gospel According to High School English Class. And here's the subtitle. This is critical. If only I had read the books assigned in high school, I may have believed the gospel sooner. It's really true. And I want to kind of share that with you today. I know we don't have a lot of time to actually read the book, so I'm going to teach you. Now, again, I'm not necessarily encouraging you to read. I am encouraging you. Read the books. The reason, I'm pretty sure that if you don't read the book, either your kids will in the future or your grandkids will in the future. I want to show you something here. Go to the next slide. Of Mice and Men was published in 1937. It actually is the most frequently taught book or novel in our public schools. The most frequently taught if you go across the entire country. And if you go, it's 500,000 copies just in its first printing alone. And it's millions and millions. There's probably a copy of this in your house somewhere. Go to the next one. This one actually is the second most frequently taught novel in public high schools. And it was first published more than 65 million copies have been sold. That's actually, 250,000 copies of the book are sold each year. That's 685 a day. This book is everywhere. And you kind of need to read it because your kids are going to read it. And when your kids read it, it would be good to be able to kind of connect it to the gospel. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to very quickly try to get you to that place of understanding that. Now again, one of the reasons why these books are so critical or are so taught in high school, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's because the things they're trying to teach you in literature are very easily identified. But the other reason is that the core life challenges that are common to all humankind are conveyed in this book. I think that's my next slide. I want you to see that. Hopefully that's what it says. Core challenges that are common to all humankind. That when we go through this, I'll show you that the things that these characters struggle with are the most basic concerns of life. And all of you have struggled with them. They're common not just to Americans, they're common to humans across the world. We all struggle with the things that Holden Caulfield struggled with. We all struggle with the things that John Steinbeck is trying to teach us. And that's why they keep teaching them, because the kids, when they read it, they relate, they can feel it, they know what's going on. And that's why it's important for us to understand them as well. And the good news is that the gospel, one of the things these books do is that they are written by non-Christians, or both of the men were non-Christians, and so the ends of their books are quite tragic. And that's important to understand too, because our world is a tragic world, and that really is the consequence of the problems that we all struggle with in many, many cases. But the good news is that the gospel has a response to these challenges. The gospel does, and if we can just get that good news out, especially after people have read these books, I think there's just a perfect platform for that acceptance of the gospel, and I'm going to try to give that to you today. So we're going to quickly, it's only 11 o'clock, I should be okay. We're going to cover The Catcher in the Rye. I'm going to teach you Catcher in the Rye in about 5 minutes. Then I'm going to teach you of Mice and Men in the next 5 minutes, and then we're going to actually look at the gospel. But we're going to look at the gospel in the place that I think has worked the best for me, and it's not necessarily the gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to look at 2 Samuel 4, and you don't have to go there yet. We'll look at that at the end. But that's the scripture where we're going to kind of pull out some truths that align with The Catcher in the Rye and Mice and Men. So let's figure out The Catcher in the Rye real quick. I'm going to teach it to you in 5 minutes. And for those kids that are out here, this isn't going to take the place of you reading the book, even though I'm going to tell you. Again, just real quick, J.D. Salinger is the one who wrote, we're going to talk about The Catcher in the Rye first. Even though your kids are going to read Steinbeck first, we're going to talk about The Catcher in the Rye. It kind of fits best with the way I want to convey this. So J.D. Salinger was the writer. The one thing I want to point out to you is he was raised in Manhattan, and so a lot of the book takes place in New York, and he understands New York pretty closely because he lived it. He attended a military academy, and Holden Caulfield is in a military academy. He's not in a military academy. He's in just a Pensy Prep, which is a high school. Just look at it as a high school. And then finally, the other thing I would point out is that J.D. Salinger, before he he wrote this, he had been to war. He had actually been to World War II. He was on the beach on D-Day at Utah. And so that's important to understand that a person wrote this when he was fairly young, in his 20s, but he had already seen the evils that our world can produce. And if you've never, again, I encourage you to read history, to see what the world, I don't need to tell you, the world's not as beautiful a place as sometimes we make it out to be. And he understood that, and that has a lot to do with why he wrote what he did. So here we go. I'm going to quickly teach you The Catcher in the Rye. The book starts with this guy, his name's Holden Caulfield, and he's interestingly enough, he's in a psychiatric ward. He's in the psychiatric ward in California. And he actually says, I know you're all wondering why I got here, so I'm just going to tell you. And the whole book is written from the first person. That means he's the narrator, and he starts telling you the story. And he starts out by telling you, it all started back in Christmas time, which was 6 months earlier. And I was at this place called Pensy Prep. It was this high school. And when he was at the high school, he opens up with this really great little kind of anecdote, which gives you an understanding of the kind of life that he lives. It's almost out of that horrible, very bad day situation. So he was the fencing manager. They had a fencing team, and he was the fencing manager. And when they would go out on these little tournaments to go fence, he was in charge of the equipment. And what happens in this event is that they're out on a subway, and he's in charge of trying to get them to where this place is. So he's reading the subway, maps and all that kind of stuff. And he finds where he needs to go. He rushes off. The whole team rushes out. They go, and he forgot the equipment. And the equipment ends up on the subway. Has that ever happened to you? Something like that has happened to you. That's what happens to him. And they miss the whole tournament. And now they're back at Pensy Prep. How do you think the people are treating him? They're saying, good job. Good job, Holden. That's how he's feeling. But that's a regular piece of his day. Just like it's a regular piece of your day, probably. And so anyway, he has many experiences like that, but one of the things he does, that kind of is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and he just decides, I'm done with this. And so one of the symbols in the book is a hunting cap. He buys this cap that he wears. I'm going to show it to you here. Go one slide. I'm going to make it come back. See that cap? He buys this hunting cap and he puts it on, and he basically says, I'm done with conforming to whatever this school is trying to have me do. I'm just kind of done with it. And you can actually see it. Does that hat go with this suit? No. And he wears that hat. Whenever he feels like really rebelling, he puts that hat on. But sometimes he doesn't feel like rebelling, so he takes it back off. But often he puts it back on. Just in the middle of New York City, wherever he is, he wears it. He doesn't care. That's kind of his symbol. If I'm not going the direction you're asking me to go, the hunting cap. So go back to the other slide. The other thing that happens is the reason this is such a significant time is he's being expelled. Interestingly enough, he's being expelled from the school. And the reason he's being expelled from the school is because he just doesn't do the work. It's not that he's not smart. It's not that he doesn't get it. It's not that he doesn't know how to write. He knows how to do all those things. He just doesn't do the work. And one of his teachers brings him in and knows he's being expelled and talks about all that. And he just said, yep, that's just... It is what it is, that it just as we often say, and that's an important part because he notices something about the teacher too when he goes and has this final conversation with him. And then one of the other things he does is he helps his fellow students. One of the cool things is even though he's having these horrible, very bad days, and he's starting to rebel, and he's understanding that the world isn't all it's cracked up to be, you see the side of him that's just really interesting because one of his friends is going out to go on a date with the woman he wants to go on a date with, and doesn't want to do his paper. He has a paper due the next day, and so he asks Holden. He says, Holden, will you write the paper? And Holden says, okay. He's already expelled. And he says, and this guy's going out with somebody that he wants to go out with, but he says, okay, I'll write the paper for you. And so he does, and he writes about his brother, Allie. And I wasn't sure if I was going to make you do this, but I'm going to have you do this. It's going pretty good. So I'm going to give you, all of you have been handed out a couple excerpts from the book. And it's kind of important to understand just who this guy is. I pulled this one out. I could skip it, but I'm not going to skip it because it gives you a sense of his writing style and how he talks, and he's 16 years old. That's another thing to understand is he's 16 years old. I don't know if you can remember what you were like when you're 16 years old, but that's this. And so he's writing about his brother Ali. Now his brother Ali is well, you're going to see a little bit about who his brother Ali was. And so just to give you a preface, he's supposed to write a descriptive paragraph. He has to describe a house or describe the church or something. And that's what the assignment is. And so here he goes. This is what he says. He says, the thing was, I couldn't think of a room or a house or anything to describe that the way Stadler said he had to have. I'm not too crazy about describing rooms and houses anyway. So what I did is I wrote about my brother Ali's baseball mitt. Now it's a very descriptive subject. It really was. My brother Ali had this left-handed fielder's mitt. He was left-handed. And the thing that was descriptive about it, though, was that he had poems written all over the fingers and the pocket and everywhere in green ink. He wrote on it so that he'd have something to read when he was out in the field and nobody was up at bat. But he's dead now. He got leukemia and died when we were up in Maine on July 18th, 1946. You'd have liked him. He was 2 years younger than I was, but he was about 50 times as intelligent. He was terrifically intelligent. His teachers were always writing letters to my mother, telling her what a pleasure it was having a boy like Ali in their class. And they weren't just shooting the crap. They really meant it. But it wasn't just that he was the most intelligent member of the family. He was also the nicest in a lot of ways. He never got mad at anybody. People with red hair are supposed to get mad very easily, but Ali never did, and he had very red hair. So now do you feel like you know a little bit about what Holden is like? That's Holden. And so he helps his fellow student. He writes that. It's interesting, when his student gets that, when he hands it to him, his student doesn't like it and rips it up. Oh my goodness. But anyway, let's go on. Let's go to the next slide. I want to see what I was going to say next. I just read Ali. We got to keep going with the story, though, because what happens is he leaves. And when he leaves, he goes to Central Park. And when he goes to Central Park, which is where his school is, he goes into New York City. There's a couple, I'm just going to go through this stuff really, really quick. He goes by this lake in Central Park. Have you guys ever been to Central Park? There's this lake and there's these ducks on it, and he notices that the ducks are still there, but he wonders where they go. He wonders where they go when the ice actually comes. He asks the cab driver, "Hey, do you know where the ducks go, or do you know who takes care of the ducks?" He has this concern about someone taking care of the innocent things of the world. He has that concern. Very important to understand. Next thing, he goes to a hotel. When he goes to this hotel in New York City, he actually gets beat up. He actually gets stolen from, and it's in response to him trying to do a nice thing. He's trying to do a nice thing with some people, and he just experiences the evil in people, and they steal from him, and he gets beat up. The next thing he does is he goes on a date, and when he goes on the date with this woman, that's when he talks about who the catcher in the rye. This woman wants to know, "What would you like to be, Holden?" She's saying, "You're getting expelled. What would you really like to be?" And he says, "I'd like to be a catcher in the rye," and we're going to talk about what that is. And then last couple things. His favorite person in the world at this point in his life is his sister. He has a sister who's 10 years old, and he just loves her so much, and he goes home and he talks with her, and she actually relates to him really wonderfully. And so that Phoebe, his sister, to him is the innocent, hindered by the world person in his life, and he just wants to keep her innocent. And he knows that people change, because when he went to a museum, one of his favorite places in the world is a museum. You know why he loves museums? because they never change. Whenever he goes to the museum, everything's the same. And if you ever go to the Natural History Museum as a kid, you just love it because there's an Indian there who's cooking something, and there's dinosaurs. And when you come back every time, it's always the same. And what he notices is that it's always the same, but he changes. Every time he goes back, he notices he's not the same person. That stuff is the same, but he's different. He's changing. Something's happening to him, and he doesn't like what's happening to him. Let's end this really quick. He decides that he's going to just leave. He's going to go. Again, part of the story is that he doesn't go straight home. He has 3 days to wait before his parents are going to find out he's been expelled. And so it's really in these 3 days that these various different things happen as he lives in New York City. But one of the things he decides along the way when he's talking to Phoebe is that he's just going to leave. He's not even going to go home. He's just going to leave and go search out the world. But Phoebe wants to come with him, and that concerns him. It concerns him that Phoebe wants to come. And so he decides instead not to go on this trip, and he just decides to go home. And that's the end of the story. Isn't that interesting? He decides to go home at the end of the story. Now let me just kind of show you what you would learn if you were looking at this from a Christian perspective. And I'm going to teach you those things really quickly. Go to the next slide. One of the things Holden realizes at the very beginning part of the book, he accepts that he has this rebellious heart that he can't control. He just accepts it. He realizes that these people want me to do this work. I don't feel like doing the work. I can't get myself to do the work. I'm just going to rebel. He accepts that he has this rebellious heart that he can't control. And that's the first kind of understanding that he has. And I don't know about you, have you ever kind of thought about whether or not you have a rebellious heart? I think you'll find that you might relate to him. The second thing he learns, which is kind of interesting, go to the next slide, is he realizes that he lives in a world that is also rebellious. All of the people that he thinks are not rebelling, as he gets to know them, whether they're his teachers or whether they're the people at the hotel or whether they're even his parents, or he finds out that they're all rebelling too. They're just hiding it. He calls them, he says, adults just hide their rebellion. All adults are phonies. They're phonies. And you know what's interesting? A lot of high school people struggle with this. I had an opportunity to be in Shane's panel of adults for that the high school students were asking questions. And the high school students, I still remember this question. They said, why are people such phonies? Why are kids such phonies? And I thought, well, kids aren't only phonies. And I tried to give that answer back. I don't think high school kids realized at that point that the whole world is phony. But Holden knows that. Holden knows that the whole world is phony. And that's kind of why he doesn't want to engage it. The next thing he figures out is that there's a problem with that. Go to the next slide. Holden realizes that people who are rebellious, you know what ends up happening? People who are phony, they create a pretty ugly world. The world itself becomes ugly when people are pretending to be something they're not. And since everybody's pretending to be something they're not, the world becomes this ugly, broken place that he actually doesn't want to live in. That's kind of what's going on. He's saying, I don't want to grow up to live in this ugly, broken world. It's not a place I want to be. And he actually considers what an alternative might be. Let's go to the next slide. He says he hopes that maybe he can fix it. He thinks that maybe if I get old enough, maybe if I get smart enough, I can fix this. And that's actually the title of the book, Catcher in the Rye. I want you to read this, because when he's asked, what do you want to be in life? And he's like, he doesn't say, I want to be a doctor. He doesn't say, I want to be a lawyer. He says, I want to be a catcher in the rye. And you might say, well, what's a catcher in the rye? Well, he tells you. I'm going to read it for you. You guys have it too. You can't read that, I know, so read yours that I handed out. It says, again, and he's saying this in response to his girlfriend, or this girl that he's on a date with, of what he wants to be. And he goes, I keep picturing all these little kids playing the same game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids, and nobody's around. Nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. And what I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look where they're going, I have to come out of somewhere and catch them. That's all I do all day. I just be the catcher in the rye. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I really want to be. So he wants to be a catcher in the rye because he realizes that people need catching. People need a hero. People need somebody to be able to help them. But what happens is he realizes he can't be it. He's honest with himself and he says, I can't be the hero. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the ability. I can't be the hero. And it scares him. It scares him that there's no hero. The world's an ugly place. What am I supposed to do? And you know, at the end of the book, where he ends up, he's in a psych ward. That's how the book ends. That's how Salinger ends the book. And yeah, again, what about you? This makes you, kids relate to that book because as they ask these questions of themselves, am I a rebel? They say yes, because I was a rebel. You should say yes too. He also noticed that he noticed that the world around him was broken. And have you noticed that the world around you is broken? Both in the macro and the micro. A lot of us say, oh, the world outside there is broken. But I know that if I came to your house, your world is broken too, because my world's broken. And again, have you been trying to fix your world? I know for the longest time I tried to fix my world. And it took a long time to realize I can't fix it, even though I said I'm letting you, Jesus, fix it. But I was trying to fix it. And what will happen is someday you'll wake up and realize you can't fix it. And you'll find yourself scared and you'll find yourself anxious. All the anxiety we have in the world is because you're trying to fix something you can't fix. He knew it. And hopefully you're answering those questions right. But if you're not, the Bible would tell you something. The Bible will tell you on the next slide that the heart is deceitful and above all things, and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? The Bible will tell you that your heart, the thing that you have that helps you make decisions, it's sick. It wants to do something different than what you know you should do. It's part of the way life is, and we can get into the theology of that. But he also says something else. This is Jeremiah 17:9, but if you keep reading on down, it's within a poem. He says something. He says, thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in a man and makes flesh his strength. What he's saying is if you trust in yourself, if you try to do this yourself, you know where you'll end up? He is like a shrub in a desert. He will not see any good come. He shall dwell in a parched places of the wilderness in an uninhabited land. That's where he's going to end up being. Okay, we got to keep moving. Let's go to the next slide. So if that one book didn't work for you, if you still feel like you can handle life and you can make your own choices and that you could be the catcher in the rye, you need to read Mice and Men. We're going to do that really quick for you too. I'm going to go really fast through Mice and Men. He too was in the war, John Steinbeck. He wrote this earlier. He earned a Pulitzer Prize. This guy got a lot of stuff that, and again, if you can only read one of the two books, I would probably read this one, Mice and Men. And maybe you actually know this story. Real quickly, Mice and Men, let's go put it up there. Do I have the next slide? No, I don't. No. Okay, there they are. There's two people in Mice and Men. Lenny and George, they're the key players. And what it's about these two guys that are in the 1930s, after the Depression, they're looking for work. And they're looking up for work down in Salinas. Many of you have been in Salinas. The reason it takes place in Salinas is because Steinbeck lived in Salinas. Steinbeck actually worked with these men as for his high school job. His high school job, he'd go out and work in the fields, and he worked around men like this. And Lenny is actually, or George, Lenny and George. Lenny is actually modeled after a person he actually knew. So Lenny and George are two men, and it's interesting. One, they take care of each other. One has a mental disability, and that would be Lenny. Lenny has a mental disability. And George has compassion on Lenny and takes care of him as they go around to these different places to work. Now he gets something out of it because Lenny is actually a really good worker. Lenny can buck whatever, buck rye or whatever they buck. He can load wagons. He can load faster than anyone. So when he shows up with this guy can do a lot of work as long as, and George works too. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, Lenny and George. And so what ends up happening is that the story's really short. They get these jobs. And their whole hope in life is to someday not have to work for someone else. They want to have their own piece of land somewhere. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And actually, this particular job, they really can see it. They think they're so close. If they just finish this little job, they're going to have enough money, and they're going to be able to get to this place where they get this land. And then finally, what really happens, though, in this story is that Lenny has this disability. And his disability is simply that he loves soft things. And the soft things, the one illustration of it is that he loves to carry around little mice. And whenever he carries around little mice, he likes to pet them. And since he's such a big, strong man, every once in a while he just squeezes them too tight because he likes them so much, and they die. And so but he always wants other things to just touch, and so George gets them for him, even though he knows he shouldn't, and puppies die. And the way the story ends is that they're all in this perfect situation where they're going to get this land, and Lenny has a problem. They give him a puppy, and the puppy he pets, and it dies. And when it dies, the woman who is the wife of the owner of the place where they're being hired comes in and says, "What's happened, Lenny?" And he says, "Oh, I killed the puppy." And she tries to comfort him and lets him touch her softness. A nice, wonderful thing to do. But he starts petting her too hard, and she panics a little bit, and he ends up killing her. Isn't that a sad ending? That's what your kids are reading. That's what life is. That's what life is. Life is hard. If you don't think people really die, if you don't think good things happen or bad things happen to good people, you're kidding yourself. That's what really happens in life. Very rarely do you get to have the land that you had hoped for. And that's how the story ends. And it actually doesn't even end there. It ends even worse. What happens is when Lenny kills this woman, George had told him, if you ever get in trouble, go to this place. And so he does. He hustles off to this place because he knows he's done a wrong thing. And George realizes that there's a posse of men that are coming to kill Lenny because they know he's just killed George, or killed the wife, and he ends up having to kill Lenny. George kills Lenny. Isn't that sad? Again, incredibly sad story. Here's what they learned. I'm going to give you really quickly. I got a couple more seconds. Our broken world is a lonely world. One of the things that you learn in this book, if you haven't learned it in Holden, is not only is the world broken, but the result of a broken world is that people are lonely. People are lonely. And the only way to make it through a lonely world is they learn something else. Go to the next thing. I forgot that. This is a great quote. It says, a guy needs somebody. This is John Steinbeck talking, conveying this point. He says, a guy needs somebody to be near him. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is, as long as he's with you. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. Have you found that to be true? Have you found it to be true that being alone, there's probably nothing worse than being alone? If you don't want to be alone. So, sometimes if you're with people, you want to be alone after a while, but if you don't want to be alone, it's a bad place. They learned that taking care of one another helps humans cope with a lonely world. That's why they stay together. They're together. They know if they can just stay together, they can make it through this world. They learned one other important thing. This is really key. Everyone hopes for a life of security, provision, and relationship. Their only hope is that someday they're going to have a place where they can live, where they won't have to work as hard, where they can kind of shield themselves from the evils of the world, where they can just live off the fat of the land, where they can be in relationship with each other. That's what they hope for. They hope for this place where they can be. And you probably hope for that too. Go to the next slide. Everybody wants a little piece of land, not much, just something that was his, something he could live on, and there could be no one to throw him off of it. If you want to have a little bit more reading, I really encourage you. I don't have time to read this for you guys, but there's this long quote in your handout, living off the fat of the land. And that's them just talking about this place they're going to get to go that is their hope and their dream, a place where they can be. So let's go to the next slide. Let me see where I'm going. I got to wrap this up. Got to wrap it up. We're going to do it though. I want to show you what you would have learned in high school if you would have read these books from Mark's perspective. If you were a Christian. You probably didn't learn this, but it was what you should have learned if I was teaching you. Everyone is broken, including yourself. We all go our own way. You would have learned that. You would have learned that broken people interacting with other broken people result in a lonely and painful world. And you probably already figured that out. Many of us strive to be heroes or fixers and providers, but we eventually learn we can't. We often pretend that we can. You would also learn that a hard life can be bearable if we're kind to each other and take care of each other. And that we all hope for a better world of security, provision, and acceptance and relationship. You guys hope for that. I know you do because I do. We all do. We all do because we're designed that way. You realize that you're designed with the hope of heaven in your heart? You're designed to want to be in a place where you have provision, a place where you're in relationship. And the Creator wants you to understand, He says that these are stories for you these two stories, if you were to read them, and your kids will read them, you would realize that there are problems in the world. But your Creator wants you to read a different story. He wants you to read the gospel. And we're going to read a story. I only got a couple minutes to cover this, but I'm not going to rush because it's the most important part. Is that He's got a story for you as well. And the story that we're going to read today, again, it won't take that long, is the story of Mephibosheth. Anybody ever read the story of Mephibosheth before? Wow, nobody. Mephibosheth? Oh my goodness. This is really important that you understand the story, because this is the way that you can teach somebody who understands themes and understands symbols, that can teach the gospel story in a real simple way. Let's go ahead and read the story. This is in 2 Samuel 4:4. I've got it up on the board. I'm going to read it for you. It says, Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came to Jezreel, and his nurse picked him up and fled. But he hurried to leave, and he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. Let me just tell you two quick things. Jonathan is the son of Saul, and it's important to know that at this time of history, this is history, Saul had just been the king, was the first king of Israel. He was the king. And Jonathan was his son, so he was a prince. And that makes Mephibosheth what? The son of a prince. And he was the son of a prince. And what happens at this event is that the king had just died and a new king was coming into place. And the new king that was coming into place was a man named David. And when David was brought into place, one of the things that happens almost in every other country, Even today, when new power comes in, what do you do with the old power? You eliminate them. You eliminate them. And so Jonathan's grandson was 5 years old, and they thought, now David's in power, they're coming to eliminate us, we need to run. And so when they run, the person who's in charge of the 5-year-old drops him, and he gets hurt, and he gets lame in both feet, to the point where he can't walk any longer. And so that's how the story begins. The story begins with a young boy who's lame in both feet, the grandson of a prince. Let's go on. 2 Samuel 9. It says, now this is later on, this is 30 years later. This is a long time later. David's in charge of the kingdom. He hasn't wiped out all the people of the past. He's sitting there, he's kind of in this graceful mood. And he says this, David the king, the current king, he says, is there anyone still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba, and they summoned him to appear before David. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he says, at your service, he replied. And the king asked, is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? And Ziba answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet. Where is he? The king asked. And Ziba answered, he is in the house of Machir, son of Ammiel in Lodabar. Just so you know, Lodabar, what that means is a low place. He's in a place that's desolate, a place that is low. So the king, David, had him brought from Lodabar to the house of Machir, son of Ammiel. And when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. And David said, Mephibosheth, at your service, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. Mephibosheth bowed down and said, What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? And then the king summoned Ziba, son Saul's steward, and said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops so that your master's grandson may be provided, and Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And then Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. So Mephibosheth ate at the king's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. Now, we don't have a lot of time to go through this. I'm going to just tell you the points, the way that, your English teacher should teach you. Here's the symbology or the symbolism of this story. The story starts with a man who wasn't initially broken, but he gets broken by the world. He's broken. And what that tells you is that your Creator knows that you're broken. He knows. He knows that you're broken, and he also knows that you can't fix yourself. Did you know that? Did you know that God knows that you're broken? Do you know that he knows that if he asked you to try to fix yourself, that you couldn't? And he gets that. He gets that you aren't going to be able to be your own hero. He also, this lesson, just like Mephibosheth, you're broken. He also knows that you long to live and thrive in a place of security, provision, fully accepted, and in relationship with others. He knows that. It doesn't emphasize that too much in this story, but if you think about it, Mephibosheth came from a place where he was at one time in the kingdom's palace when he was 5 years old. All the people around him had told him about how it was at one point in his life. You know that he longed to be back in that place, although he knew he could never qualify to do that. And so he lived in this place of brokenness, even though he desired to be in a different place. And God knows you desire to be in a different place. Where do you desire to be? You probably desire to be in your own land, but where you really desire to be is in a place where there's no violence, a place where there's only peace, a place where everything's provided for. You know a place like that exists for you? You know, Jesus said, he goes, I'm going to a place where my Father's house is, and there are many rooms for you there. And he goes, if there weren't these rooms, I wouldn't come back. I wouldn't be going, and I wouldn't come back and get you. These are there for you. There's a place you can go. There's a way that you can get there. Your Creator knows you long to have that place, and He has that place for you. Let's go to the next slide. Your Creator knows that you need a hero and a catcher in the rye. He knows that you can't be your own hero. He knows that you need it. And so He provided you one. He provided you a hero who could pay the price. He provided you a hero who can walk in a way that was able to create a way for us to get to heaven. If you ever want to understand that, come back next week and we'll talk more about that. But He knew you needed a catcher in the rye, so He sent you one. He sent you a hero. He sent you Jesus Christ. He also knew your Creator is expressing kindness when He asks you to come join Him in this place. If you look at the story of Mephibosheth, how does Mephibosheth get to the place? What does he have to do? He doesn't have to do anything. Why is he being brought there? If you look at the story, the reason he's going is because David wants to express some kindness to Jonathan. He wants to express kindness on behalf of Jonathan. Jonathan was his friend. In the same way, when you understand the gospel, you understand that God is offering you a place of heaven. He's offering you heaven, and all you have to do is accept that someone else has paid that price for you. You accept that the hero has done the work. You don't have to do the work yourself. You don't have to clean yourself up. You don't have to become unbroken. Let's look at the next slide so I know where I'm going. There's a real key part to this story, though, is that Mephibosheth has a choice when David asks him to come. Mephibosheth can either go or not go. When he's asked to come to this place where he could maybe eat at the table of the king for the rest of his life, he may consider that impossible. How could that really be the case? How could a person be that kind? How could a person be that good? And he could have chosen not to go, but he chooses to go. And when he goes, he finds that, in fact, that is the case. In fact, he gets to sit at this table. In fact, he gets to be with the king. He gets to be with the king's family. He gets treated with kindness. By the way, do you know what kindness means? I just learned this the other day. When you treat someone with kindness, it's a derivative of the term kin. And if you think about kin is your family. When you treat someone with kindness, what that means is you're treating them as if they're part of your family. That's what kindness means. And so that's what God does. He treats us as if we're part of His family because we are part of His family. He invites us to come, and He expects us to respond. So let me end because I'm way over time. Some of you out there are still considering that invitation. You know, God does make this invitation to you. He makes this invitation that you can come and be a part of His family, that you can have a place in heaven. You can actually live in this world knowing that you have that place. That's a really powerful thing, to live your life that way. But you have to come. And some of you need to make that decision today. Some of you have to figure out, have I ever really said I would come? That might be a question that you have to answer, and I want you to think about even right now. as you get this opportunity. I'm going to have the band come up. Some of you have accepted the invitation, and you're here now just kind of on this journey, and you're walking, and you have the hope of heaven, and every once in a while you really get it, and you have glimpses of what it will really be like, and you have glimpses on this earth of what a life with Christ will be like in heaven, and it gives you enough strength to go on to the next day. But you need a fresh word of encouragement. And hopefully you have a fresh word of encouragement today. And I think the Lord would say to you, if you want to do something to kind of keep that motivation or to keep that hope alive, He would tell you that you should go find someone lonely today. It's that simple. Do you want to do what God asks you to do? He doesn't ask you to go and build houses or to go and do something complicated. If you think about it, He just said, go love your neighbor. Find someone lonely today. And when you find someone lonely, go and be kind to them. Go and be kind to. Is there someone lonely in your life today? Is there someone that comes to mind that is sitting in their house and they just could use a visit or a phone call? That's what Jesus is asking you to do today. He's saying, go find someone lonely and be kind to them. But the one thing He's definitely telling you is you're not allowed to do nothing. You're not allowed to do nothing. A lot of times we come to church and we get these motivating messages and we go back home and we don't do anything different. And I don't want that to be the case today. Today I want you to do something different. Do it for J.D. Salinger. Do it for Steinbeck. He would want you to understand this, but most of all, do it for your God, who died on a cross, paid the price, He rose again so that you could have the hope of heaven. And that frees you to be kind to the lonely people in the world who are just waiting to hear this good news that there's a God that loves them and that they can be part of the family. Let me pray. Father, I praise You. Just pray that somehow You would take this kind of jumbled message and turn it into something that can move our hearts, that we can become people who understand how good You are and how gracious You are, and that we would live our lives in a way that would get people into the kingdom. Tell the people who don't know that they have a catcher in their eye. Tell the people that don't know that there's a heaven awaiting them. Father, we